Hi guys, and welcome to my YouTube channel. So I decided that I was going to go ahead and double up the podcast as a YouTube channel as well, because this can serve as some visual media for the podcast and kind of help me explain the cases in a different way than just on the podcast. So my plan here is to go ahead and start filming and uploading some cases that I've already covered on my podcast, and then this will continue into season 2 and moving forward. So there won't be any new cases on this channel yet. I will launch season 2 of the podcast on January 15th, and from that point forward there will be new cases on this channel. So for the first video on this channel, I decided to go ahead and re-film/record my Jennifer Servo episode. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into this case again. Jennifer Lynn Servo was born on September 23rd, 1979 in Columbia Falls, Montana. And this is where she grew up and spent most of her life. Jennifer developed a love of writing in high school, and this love sparked a new passion for journalism, and that became her ambition, was to become a broadcast journalist. She often talked in high school and beyond about becoming the next Katie Couric. During the summer after her junior year of high school, Jennifer joined the Army Reserves, and this was to help pay her college tuition. After high school, she did attend the University of Montana in Missoula, where she studied journalism. While she was in college, she worked at KECI, which was a small television station in Missoula. In May of 2002, Jennifer graduated from the University of Montana, and she was quickly hired at KRBC, which is a television station in Abilene, Texas. So in July of 2002, Jennifer packed up and moved to Abilene. Jennifer had always been described as outgoing and free-spirited, so by all accounts, she was incredibly excited about this move and starting this new chapter of her life in a brand new place. According to those close to her, Jennifer was extremely happy at her new job, and her coworkers liked her a lot. She had even become close friends with several of them. Jennifer was incredibly good at her job. Anyone who knew her or worked with her saw that she had tremendous potential and that she was truly up and coming as a news anchor, that she had an incredible career ahead of her. So now, with a little bit of background out of the way, we can actually get into the night of Jennifer's murder. On September 15, 2002, Jennifer had worked a very long shift at KRBC, and she left sometime around 10 p.m. that night. After leaving work, she headed to the grocery store with one of her friends and her coworker, a weatherman named Brian Travers. Security cameras did capture the two at the grocery store around 10:45 p.m. Jennifer was actually scheduled to have a few days off of work, but on September 17, 2002, her boss attempted to call her to see if she could come in, as they were a little bit shorthanded that day. However, when he called her home, there was no answer, which he thought was a little strange. He tried calling again on September 18th, but again there was no answer. Jennifer's mother, Sherry, also tried calling Jennifer, but again, no response. This immediately concerned her mother, as Jennifer would not go this long without talking to her mother. Out of concern, Brian Travers and another coworker drove to Jennifer's apartment to check on her and see if she was all right. When they drove by, they noted that the blinds were down, which was strange because Jennifer typically kept the blinds up so that her cat could see outside. On September 18th, Jennifer's boss called her apartment complex and had them conduct a welfare check. Soon after this, coworkers at KRBC heard on the police scanner that there was police activity at Jennifer's apartment that day, and that there was a possible DOA. On September 18, 2002, it was confirmed that Jennifer Servo had been found deceased in her apartment. I will preface this with a bit of a trigger warning because there is going to be mention of sexual assault. Jennifer had been sexually assaulted and strangled, and there was evidence of blunt force trauma to her head. Numerous bloodstains were found throughout the apartment, and her phone and her purse were not at the scene, and they could not be located. no murder weapon was ever found. There was no sign of forced entry into the apartment, and according to friends and family, Jennifer was incredibly diligent about safety and would not have allowed a stranger into her home, especially not so late at night. Jennifer's phone records from September 15th were examined, and it was discovered that at around 12:30 a.m., she had returned home from grocery shopping and had had a phone conversation with a man named Dave Warren. Dave Warren was an ex-boyfriend of Jennifer's. They had been together for quite some time. Even though they were no longer romantically involved, they had kept in contact and remained good friends. Upon speaking with Dave, it was learned that there was nothing out of the ordinary or suspicious about their conversation, and Dave was nowhere near the scene at the time of Jennifer's death. He was over 1,000 miles away, back in Montana. There was, however, some useful information gleaned from this phone call. Based on the time the phone call was made and the length of the call, investigators were able to determine that Jennifer's killer had come into her apartment and killed her sometime after 1:30 a.m. So, of course, because Brian Travers was the last person confirmed to have seen Jennifer alive, he was interviewed and investigated. Brian said that Jennifer had helped him unload some groceries at his house before leaving to head home to her apartment. He also says that he went straight to bed that night. Family and friends of Jennifer said that Brian seemed like a nice guy. He had even grieved with them after the loss of their loved one. Initially, the family had no suspicions about Brian. However, while police were interviewing him, his parents did hire him an attorney. It wasn't until a week after Jennifer's death that Brian disclosed some suspicious information to the police. He told them that Jennifer had previously shared with him that she felt like someone had been following her for some time. In fact, he told police that on the night of September 15th, Jennifer had thought someone was following them after they left the grocery store, and that they were making all of the same turns that they were. The fact that Brian had waited a week to offer up this information did strike investigators as strange and suspicious, and they began to look at him more as a suspect than a witness or a friend. It was also discovered that at some point Brian and Jennifer had been more than friends. According to some friends of Jennifer's, they had at some point shared some form of intimacy. Although it's not exactly clear what that entails, Jennifer had reportedly told a friend that whatever happened between them was a one-time thing and that she was only interested in Brian as a friend. Brian allegedly did want something more with Jennifer, but he has never confirmed this himself. Forensic examination of Jennifer's apartment revealed that there were multiple DNA profiles from multiple different men in her apartment. One of those DNA profiles did in fact belong to Brian Travers. Despite this, investigators couldn't make any more progress in the investigation. It was well known that Brian had often been in Jennifer's apartment, and he had openly discussed this himself. Overall, Brian was cooperative with police, and he was eventually cleared as a suspect. There was another DNA profile found in Jennifer's apartment that piqued police interest. This DNA belonged to a man named Ralph Sepulveda, a former Army Ranger and a much more recent ex of Jennifer's. Jennifer met Ralph while in the Army Reserves, and when they returned to Missoula, Montana, they did begin a romantic relationship. Ralph was actually 12 years older than Jennifer, so at the time of her death, she was 22 years old and Ralph was 34. Jennifer's family have been very open about their dislike for Ralph. They never thought that he was right for her, and they always thought that they had a toxic relationship. The discovery of his DNA in her apartment opened up a whole other can of worms in this investigation. Investigators learned that Ralph had actually moved to Abilene, Texas with Jennifer after she got her job at KRBC. However, a few weeks after the couple's big move, Ralph informs Jennifer that he actually had a fiancé back in Montana. Not only that, he also had a child. Immediately after finding this out, Jennifer kicked Ralph out of the apartment. He didn't move back to Montana, however. He moved just down the road from Jennifer. Friends of Jennifer's have stated that she confided in them that Ralph had some concerning sexual preferences that made her uncomfortable, namely choking. There is no record that Jennifer had much, if any, contact with Ralph in the weeks leading up to her murder. Initially, Ralph was cooperative with investigators. Upon being questioned, he claimed that he hadn't spoken to or seen Jennifer in weeks. It's also reported that he never expressed much emotion over Jennifer's death, and he didn't even attend her funeral. Not only that, but he didn't even send his condolences to her family. And to top all of that off, he eventually refused to take a polygraph test. Not long after police started investigating him, Ralph abruptly left town, and police tracked him down at a military base in San Antonio, Texas, which is about 4 hours away from Abilene. They were unable to charge Ralph with anything or even arrest him because there just wasn't enough non-circumstantial evidence to connect him to Jennifer's murder. In January of 2003, 4 months after Jennifer's murder, her family received a letter from the University of Montana. In the letter, the university informed them that Jennifer's library card had been used to check out 4 books after her murder. It was noted that her library card could likely have been in her purse, which was not located at the crime scene and has never been found to this day. However, police eventually concluded that this was nothing more than a clerical error. In 2008, another news anchor named Ann Presley was murdered in Little Rock, Arkansas. Her murder was very similar to Jennifer's in a number of ways, and she even bore a resemblance to Jennifer. In that case, police were able to use DNA to link a man named Curtis Vance to the murder and arrest him. It was initially thought that Curtis Vance may have also had something to do with Jennifer's murder, but eventually he was ruled out in that case because there was none of his DNA found in Jennifer's apartment. A few years after Jennifer's death, the University of Montana, where she graduated from, created the Jennifer Servo Memorial Award. And this award is presented every year to a graduating female senior at the university who shows tremendous potential in broadcast journalism. Jennifer Servo was a vibrant, outgoing woman with a remarkable talent and passion for journalism. She had an incredible career ahead of her, and that was stolen away from her. To this day, 18 years later, her family and friends still have no answers, and no one has been arrested or charged in connection with her case. It's been almost 2 decades, and Jennifer still has not received justice. Jennifer Lynn Servo was murdered in her apartment sometime after 1:30 a.m. on September 16, 2002, in Abilene, Texas. If you have any information or think you might have any information about Jennifer's murder, please contact the Abilene Crime Stoppers at 325-676-8477. Thank you so much for watching this video, even if you've already listened to my podcast episode. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at crimeagainpod or on Instagram at crimeagainpodcast. Again, thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much for listening if you listen to the podcast on another platform. I'll see you in the next video.